Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to Drums and Drams. My name is Cameron, and on tonight's episode, I'm going to be taking a look at two special edition whiskeys to come out of a local distillery here in Columbus, Ohio. These are the Whiskey War Barrel Select Batches 1 and 2 from the High Bank Distillery. Alright, so before we get into the tasting tonight, I wanted to take a second to talk about High Bank Distillery and the two bourbons that I'm going to be taking a look at. High Bank Distillery is a very young distillery here in Columbus, Ohio. They opened their doors in June of 2018, so they're just about 2.5 years old at this point. As many young distilleries do, they released a vodka, a gin, a rum, and some different young whiskey variants to really sort of build their portfolio and get their name out there. Now, some of the things that they're doing on the whiskey side, they have the Midnight Cask, which is a blend of port wines and bourbon. For me, that's always been a little bit too sweet. Some other people I know really enjoy it, but I really think it leans too heavily on the port wine there, but a good idea nonetheless. They have their Whiskey War, which is sort of their main bourbon offering. They also have Whiskey War Barrel Proof. Both of these are a blend of high rye, very young bourbons from MGP and a distillery in Tennessee. We can all guess who that would be. And they also have released a double oaked variant of this, which spends an additional 12 to 18 months in another cask. And I really think that's the best thing that High Bank has put out at this point. It balances that really extreme youth with some additional flavor, some additional sweetness, and it rounds everything out to a point that I think is more drinkable than some of the other things that they put out, which for me typically have been a little bit harsh, ethanol forward, rough around the edges, but really what you would expect from very young distillate. Now, sourcing from MGP and things like this, I always wish they would have sourced some older stuff. I know that business models and different practices, of course, they might have to be budget conscious and all of this kind of stuff. But overall, I think that they're moving in the right direction. They're trying new things, and as evidenced by these releases, they are doing different finishes to try to, in some cases, make up for the youth of the whiskeys that they're using right now. So with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at these bottles, and I'll kind of talk you through what we have here. So we have batches 1 and 2 of their Barrel Select series. These are the very first batches of this. Very few bottles were made, and there was a pre-sign up process and all of that kind of stuff. I didn't actually end up getting a bottle of either of these releases, and I was fortunate enough to have a friend hook me up with 2 samples here, one of each of the releases. So these are essentially prop bottles that are not going to get opened. They're just for show, but I wanted to use them for this video because I wanted to show just how pretty they are. The sort of construction of the bottle is really, really solid. I'm sure this topper is really high quality. It looks beautiful with these crossed guns up here, and the white label just really sets it off. It reminds you of that Weller CYPB, that ultra classiness. So I love what they've done here with the packaging, and to really even bring it to another level, they've included this velvet bag, which I just took the one off of this to show you the bottle inside, but it's just beautiful. It reminds you of the Pappies, or it reminds you of the Crowns, all of those different whiskeys that have that bag contained with them. Okay, so what they've done here is they've taken their Whiskey War Barrel Proof, which, like I said, is a young blend of high rye bourbons, 2 from MGP and 1 from a Tennessee distillery. It's aged just a little over 2 years, and it's at 59.25%, and then they finished that whiskey in secondary casks, secondary wine casks. So the release number 1 was this bottle here, and it was finished in Sangiovese wine barrels. I believe I said that right. So we have that as batch number 1, and batch number 2 was finished in Cabernet wine barrels. So I'm expecting some slight variance here. Cabernet is obviously used quite a bit with bourbon finishing, and Sangiovese is perhaps less common, but I'm really curious to see what we have here. I also have to quickly shout out my friend Nick and Austin from the Bourbon Collective here in Columbus, Ohio. They hooked me up with these samples and these bottles, so a big thank you to you guys. It really means a lot, and I wanted to get a review of this out even though I couldn't pick these bottles up myself. So let's go ahead and get into it. Nick already took his half of the samples, so this is my very first time trying either of these releases, and I'm very excited to see what we have. So this is going to be release number 1, which is the Sangiovese Finish, and this other glass is going to have release number 2, which is the Cabernet Finish. So my sort of control bourbon tonight, to attempt to get sort of a baseline for this, was Four Roses Small Batch Select. It's a little bit of a lower proof than the 59.25% that we have with both of these releases, but it has a high rye mash bill, and it just, I really thought it would prep my palate for what we have coming up here, even though obviously it's not a wine finished bourbon. So let's go ahead and start with batch 1, which is the Sangiovese. Let's see what we get on the nose here. All right, so the first thing that I get is just a dollop of ethanol right off the bat. You can definitely smell the youth here. But you can also get some nice, lighter, sweeter caramels, and there's definitely some fruit in this as well. Yeah, the cinnamon spice, the rye spice is really, really strong. All of that young high rye MGP is really coming through here. The age, which is, they say, about 4 years after you take the initial 2+ year, whiskey war barrel proof and then finish it for a total of 4 years. That youth is just really, it's still too apparent in this release for me. But you get some good vanillas, good vanillas, light caramels, some slight honey, kind of middle of the road red fruit, nothing absurdly sweet about the red fruit. It's just sort of there. It's almost perfumed in a way because it's so light. There's nothing heavy about this. But again, yeah, ethanol, rye, cinnamon, all of that is really punching up front with all of those supporting flavors being the vanillas, caramels, fruit, all of that good stuff. All right, let's go ahead and see what we get on the palate. Ooh, that's a hot one. So it's definitely mouth-watering. It's a little bit of a thinner mouthfeel than you would expect for something that punches you so hard. I would assume that's, due to the youth. But with that said, it does punch hard up front. And if you're looking for, kind of that high proof experience, you're going to find that here. Let me think about what's going on with all this. It's cinnamon, it's pepper, it's rye spice right up front. It transitions into, some of those vanillas and caramels. There's also a hint of green apple I'm getting in here. And I don't think that would come from the finishing cask. That's got to be coming from the base spirit, the Whiskey War Barrel Proof. And there's actually quite a bit of nuttiness to this as well, which, in my opinion, if you're going to take, nutty whiskey and finish it, you probably want to hide the nuttiness with some of that finishing cask. And this one still has quite a bit of that nuttiness on it. Now, when I go back to the nose here, I'm starting to get some more like apricots. This is almost reminding me of Yellowstone's 2020 limited release in the sense that it's slightly nutty, it smells young, but at the same time it does have some lighter fruits in there. And now those fruits are kind of coming into focus as basically apricots. Yeah, it's getting slightly better on the nose, I would say. I'm going to go in for a second sip. Yeah, more of the same thing. The fruitiness is getting better, and I really appreciate that. The nuttiness is dying down just a bit. There's some honey in here. I mentioned light caramels earlier. Everything is a little bit light and spicy. The wine cask here is not imparting too much influence. It seems like it's sort of mellowing out the rough edges, but it's not contributing enough to really adding a ton of fruit, a ton of density, syrupy sweetness, anything like that. So I'm going to let that sit for now. I'm going to come back to that one, but I want to go ahead and get to number 2 and then maybe go side by side, back and forth, and do sort of a final comparison before we wrap this up. So This is Whiskey War Barrel Select release number 2. That's a mouthful. And this is the Cabernet Finish. Oh yeah, you can definitely tell that this is a Cab Finish. It is much more dense on the nose than this first batch that they did. You're getting some nice rich caramels, a little bit of that like sticky butterscotch going on. But you're getting some darker fruits. You're actually starting to smell the wine grapes in there just a bit. Some like nice dark cherry notes, that kind of thing. There's a little bit of funk. If you would imagine maybe like a Macallan 12 sherry oak, that kind of slight sulfured sherry funk. There's a little bit of funk in here from the wine. But yeah, the caramel is so much more dense on here. Oh wow, yeah, that first one smells like a Jim Beam product compared to this. All right, I'm much more excited about number 2. Let me taste this on the palate. What a difference that makes. That tastes like a significantly older bourbon than the first one. And I would assume these have both spent a similar amount of time in those finishing casks, but this is a night and day difference. I can say with confidence already, even though I haven't gone back and forth, that this is going to blow the first release, the Sangiovese Finish, out of the water. There's a reason that people use Cabernet to finish bourbons. Even though it's still not a hugely, common or widely accepted practice necessarily compared to other finishes, there's a reason that you've seen it before and you don't really see the Sangiovese thing going on. Yeah, this is working very well. Nice, yeah, and you go back to the nose, you start to get some oak, like some legit aged oak on the nose, and a little bit of that leather. But again, the funk of that semi-sherry feel going on in the nose, that funk with the oak is contributing to make this feel older than it is. Ah, delicious. I'm gonna go for a second sip. Dark fruits, cherries, dark berries like plum. There's definitely plum in there, some fig. Just that grapiness from the wine cask. There's a great amount of spice, but it's not overwhelming and it doesn't attack your mouth like the first batch. It's just enough there to keep the palate interesting. It's keeping the finish to maybe a medium finish. It's not hanging on too much in the back palate into the throat, but just enough to really be pleasant. This is an amazing and great, drinkable bourbon. I kind of wish I had a bottle of this actually. Yeah. Wow. I am very surprised by this. I've got to say, I've had so much faith in High Bank with what they've been doing, and so much of it seems like great idea, but the execution not so great. Let's give it a few more years. And I went into this with the impression of the Midnight Cask, which again I said was too sweet with that port blend, or the Whiskey War Barrel Proof, which is just too young and too harsh. The double oaked has always been okay because they found a way to really balance it with that secondary casking. This is the best thing that they've put out. This Cabernet Finish is something they should add to their common lineup, their core lineup. This needs to be in there because it is delicious. I'm gonna have another sip. Killer. It's killer. The spice up front transitions immediately to really nice, dense, rich caramels. Spice comes back, then you get some fruity notes coming in, the grape, the dark cherry. I still think there might be some apricot in here, call me crazy. Little bit of peanut, but not too much. Then it starts to go into the finish. It's moving back. I'd say it's a medium-long finish at this point, maybe not even medium. I wouldn't put this up against something like the Chateau de la Baude or anything like that. But man, this is a great whiskey. I'm gonna go back to release number 1 and let's see what we get here. Yeah, much lighter. The honey really comes out now once you compare this. The honey, the peanut brittle, the apricot. It reminds me definitely of that Yellowstone 2020, like I said. All right, last sip of release number 1. Yeah. Like, to me, this is like a really good cocktail bourbon. There's enough sharp spice. There's enough character to this to really stand up in a cocktail. It's got a nice proof to it. There are some good flavors in it that aren't quite deep enough, but could be amplified with the help of other mixers and things like that. But yeah, it's just sort of rough around the edges. It's bright. It's young. And I don't think that wine cask is the best pairing for this bourbon. All right, back to release number 2 and the final sip of the night, and then we're going to wrap this up. Now, when you compare these back to back like this, it makes this second release seem a little bit too sweet in some ways, or maybe a little bit too wine influenced. What's funny is, like, this seems like you took the Midnight Cask, which is that port and bourbon blend, but you blended it more towards the bourbon. It still has that almost fortified wine taste in it, where maybe it spent just a little bit too long in a Cabernet barrel and it absorbed just a little bit too much sweetness, but it's still really, really good. But it has that slight fortified wine note in there that reminds me of the Midnight Cask port being blended in there. But I've got to say, for a 4-year-old bourbon, this is probably the best version of that I can think of that I've ever tried. The price point is a little bit high. I think these were over $100 a piece, if I'm not mistaken. Even if they were just at $100, it's still a little bit high for what you're getting, especially with batch number 1. But again, I can't say it enough. High Bank should be doing this as a core lineup release. This Cabernet Finish, it should sit in the core lineup at about $65, $70 a bottle. I would buy that all day because I think this is a really, really good bourbon. And I can't wait to see what they do, coming up. They're saying that they want to do 2 to 4 different releases in their Barrel Select line per year, and the next one is slated for spring/summer 2021. So I'm not sure what that finish is going to be, but I'm really excited to see what they do. In terms of value, it's not a great value in my book, but when you consider the fact that this is a local distillery, for a local person like me, someone who wants to own something limited, someone who, wants to be a part of a company that's local and wants to buy local and all that kind of stuff, it's not such a bad value. I'll never say it's a good value, but I will say that it's acceptable, especially if you live here in Columbus, to spend the money on something like this. And I think High Bank's doing it right. They just started this whiskey club here in town. They're trying to really be transparent. They have a great restaurant. They are reaching out and really involving the community, and that's all the right stuff that you want to be doing. So while I'm always going to be honest, I'm always going to call things out the way that I see them, I would say that even if High Bank's products traditionally have been a little young, a little experimental, and rough around the edges, I think the potential is really there for them to grow, and I'm stoked about it. So, in 2 years and 4 years, whatever it is, I think that High Bank is going to be turning out some really great products. If you like this video, please subscribe to the channel. Give the video a like, all those good things. Find me on Instagram, find me on Facebook. Send me an email, drop me a line if there's anything you'd like me to review. I've been doing this new Tuesday 2-minute tasting series, and it's gotten a lot of good feedback. So if you have anything you'd like to see me do on that series, on a full review, just let me know, and I'd be happy to make that happen. But until next time, I will see you later, and I'm really excited about what's to come here with Drums and Drams. The channel's been getting a lot of good attention, a lot of good feedback, good traction, and all that kind of stuff. So I appreciate all of your support, and I'm going to end my night with this second release, this Cabernet Finish of the Whiskey War Barrel Select. So cheers, and happy holidays, everybody.